1930s through the 1950s, radio was the premier entertainment medium accessible to the masses. It was the basic thing that people could turn on and be entertained, listening to a multitude of genres from music to comedy to drama to science fiction, basically all the genres that you could see nowadays on almost any entertainment platform, whether it be your basic cable or whether it be some of the original content on Amazon or Netflix or those types of mediums. Starting in my childhood, thanks to an introduction by my father, I was introduced to the old-time radio shows broadcast through this golden age. They were quite a diverse set, and I'm very thankful that he did that because now I have knowledge of the classics like The Shadow, the Abin Costello, The Lone Ranger. Today I thought I'd share parts of my collection. It contains a lot of these Radio Spirits albums and single audio cassettes, along with this suspense pack from Great American Audio. But recently I got to add to it through these various yesteryear 8-track tapes and radio reruns packs due to a family inheritance. Now, as you can see, most of these are audio cassettes. They were the cheap medium of the 90s, even though they're slowly starting to get phased out for CDs. Nowadays, you need one of these, an audio cassette player, in order to be able to listen to these, and these are actually becoming a little bit more rare. But recently, they started to make a comeback. Now, as I mentioned, these are cheap. Audio cassettes were not known for their durability, and as you can see, this one is completely ruined. These containers weren't exactly durable either. Now, as I mentioned, most of my collection consists of these Radio Spirits albums. Usually they contain half-an-hour episodes, 18 episodes, basically 9 hours. My most diverse collection, as you can see here, has to be the Western genre. The Western genre was the premier genre of the time, whether it was at the movies or on TV when it first came out. It was very popular. The first of these I'd like to talk about is Tales of the Texas Ranger, which starred Joel McCrea as Ranger Davis Pearson, based on actual cases undertaken by the Texas Rangers. Unfortunately, it wasn't one of the most well-known and has almost been lost to history. Next is Hopalong Cassidy, who, as I recall, my grandfather remembers watching. He was pretty popular and has more than a few seasons in his collection. He was also one of the few to be played in all genres, originally by the same actor, William Boyd. Next is The Six Shooter, which ran for one season and starred James Stewart as Britt Ponset. The legendary Jimmy Stewart's voice only adds to the radio, but unfortunately it came towards the end of radio's run. As you can see, probably the largest part of my collection consists of Lone Ranger albums. For his signature is Hi-Yo Silver and the narrator's Lone Ranger Rides Again sayings. He always wore a mask and always shot to disarm, not to kill. Theme music is that of the last part of the William Tell Overture. Then there was Gunsmoke. This was atypical in that it was geared specifically towards adults, whereas most of these could pass as kids shows. It dealt with Marshal Matt Dillon, played by William Conrad, having to keep justice in Dodge City, Kansas. As you can see, this is a different album. It's a lot larger and has a guide talking about the production and all the episodes that came along with it. Next is the adventure genre. As you can see, there are a few different parts of this genre. The first was Sergeant Preston of the Yukon, also called Challenge of the Yukon, and it dealt with Mountie Sergeant Preston with his trusted dog King having to overcome essentially the Wild West in the Yukon territory, except very snowy. There's the Green Hornet, with Britt Reed having advanced weaponry dealing against various crime in his city, while masquerading as the publisher of the Daily Sentinel during the day, along with his Filipino valet Cato. Of note is that the Lone Ranger, the Green Hornet, and Sergeant Preston were all produced in WXYZ Detroit. They were all original ideas, and there's actually a connection between the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet and that original Green Hornet, Britt Reed. Next is the comedy genre, which has many different classics. The first of which is Jack Benny, who is basically the grandfather of modern comedy in a way. Having come from a vaudeville background, his show eventually became the blueprint by which all modern sitcoms operate, and by which verbal comedy operates as well. Next is the Mel Blanc show. Mel Blanc, being the original voice of the Looney Tunes, got his own show ever so briefly. Next is probably the most well-known comedy duo of history, Abin Costello, the original comedy duo. The first album features their famous Who's On First routine, which made them famous. And the second album is referred to as a Lost Episodes album. As you could see, it's got some rare episodes in it. And then this little single tape includes the Marx Brothers, who are also very well known and are considered one of the great comedy families, with the five brothers Chico, Groucho, Harpo, Gummo, and Zeppo. For the most part, it's just a collection of skits, but it's still very entertaining. Next, with the mystery genre, I may have the most in terms of diversity. As you can see, here are all different productions, though over these three iterations, from versions of The Empty House. Next is Boston Blackie. From comic books, he was originally a safecracker turned detective, again helping in a quest for redemption against the criminal underworld. Next is Nightbeat, which is a very interesting one, as it stars Nightbeat reporter Randy Stone going about picking up his own stories for Go Star. He comes across many different personalities, and we get to see the good and the bad of reality. Then we have the Shadow, known for his lines, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men, and crime does not pay." The man with the ability to cloud men's minds so you cannot see. The first actor to portray the Shadow and his sidekick and pretty much girlfriend Margot Lane are actually two well-known actors, Orson Welles and Agnes Moorehead respectively. To round out these singles, we have Ellery Queen, who was another detective, and Dick Tracy, another private detective, whose episodes were specifically geared towards kids and who had a lot of product promotions going, and whose episodes were only 15 minutes long. To round out my singles collection are some standalones, including this Lux Radio Theater episode, which actually served as a pilot of sorts for future detective Philip Marlowe. We have this radio dramatization of The Wizard of Oz, which, as you can imagine, is nowhere near the quality of the movie. And then these two Screen Players episodes with the Maltese Falcon and this Gun for Hire adaptions. Now for this great American audio pack with suspense, which can best be described as an anthology similar to Twilight Zone. In fact, it both predated Twilight Zone and actually lasted after Twilight Zone, ending in the 60s. This also featured well-known actors, again seeing Orson Welles and Agnes Moorehead in different episodes, and also included Vincent Price and Robert Taylor. Next is the more recent addition to my collection, these 8-track tapes released by Radio Yesteryear. Next are these singles by Radio Reruns. Instead of having 2 episodes or 3 episodes per tape, these only have 1. Is Gangbusters, which is a well-known series in and of itself. In case I missed it, here's my original collection Gangbusters tape. It's possible that due to the limitations of the time, in 1977 they just didn't have the room for more episodes. Now this diverse collection appears in the sampler genre. As you could see, Radio Yesteryear released one, along with several by Radio Spirits and this Great American Audio sampler as well. This Radio Yesteryear sampler is very interesting because it contains the intros of many different radio shows. Now, something unique I want to talk about is this unique Radio Favorites album released by Radio Spirits. It's got a diverse set of episodes ranging from westerns to science fiction to mystery to comedy. Now, I'd like to take a chance to talk about the various radio companies. Radio yesteryear seems to have an Amazon store, but they don't sell anything new. They just sell the same old audio cassettes. No CDs, and they don't have a service allowing you to buy any MP3 files. Obviously, that makes all their lineup that I've gone through out of print. They also have a Discog store, but again, it's just cassette tapes, no CDs or MP3s. What's weird though is that despite not having an actual store, they do have a tune-in station in which you can hear daily broadcasts of classic radio shows. It's a little weird that they would have a station but no store. Great American Audio is in worse shape. They don't even have a tune-in station, and again, while they do have a Discog store, they don't sell any MP3s on it though. They do have a few CDs. I think it's safe to say that Great American Audio is probably out of business, and as a result, all of these collections are out of print. But radio yesteryear is obviously harder to understand. It's obviously in some kind of transitionary phase. Maybe they're going to make a comeback. Fortunately, is brighter. Radio Reruns does have a site, but they do all of their sales through their vintage broadcast site, specifically continuing to selling their single episodes, except this time in CDs and MP3s. Between them and Radio Spirits, I would actually say that they have the more diversity, as you could see from this catalog, but having looked more closely, they're lacking in some of the actual episodes of some of these radio shows. Radio Spirits right now is the king when it comes to old radio shows. As I mentioned, they have a multitude of genres, still selling most of the series that I've featured. And while unlike vintage broadcasts, they don't sell MP3 files directly, you can still get access through their Radio Vault subscription service for $20 a month. You only have a limited number of MP3s, but you can stream almost anything that they have available. An interesting thing right now is that even though most of the series that I featured are Radio Spirits, most of these are out of print. The only one that I found that was fully intact was Hopalong Cassidy, which now appears in this Hopalong Cassidy Silver Spurs. The arrangement is slightly different, but still the same series. There's more overlap with the 6-shooter, also the 6-shooter special edition, but it's only a partial. This particular Radio Spirits album is unfortunately out of print, though they do have other packs. If you're curious and you want to have a closer look without straining your eyes, Radio Spirits actually has a free catalog. Just go on and order it and they'll send it to you. As you can see, they have a lot of diversity in their selections. And they also sell music, movies, TV shows, and more. Getting back to the rest of these collections, Tales of the Texas Rangers, they don't seem to sell at all, so this collection is definitely out of print. Same with all the Mel Blanc shows. And what surprises me the most is that even though The Shadow, as you can see here, is available on the Radio Vault subscription service, there's no episode albums currently sold on their website. It's possible they may phase it back in, but I'm still surprised considering how classic of a show The Shadow is. What's most surprising is that there's no Abin Costello content available on either service. Just like The Shadow, Gangbusters is not sold in physical media, and Dick Tracy is out of place completely, again possibly having to do with their licensing issues. Same with Ellery Queen and the Marx Brothers. It's the same with these particular theater cassettes, though there are other radio theater packets available. What's really interesting about this era is seeing all the sponsors that were around at the time. For example, The Shadow was sponsored by Goodyear. Jack Benny was sponsored by Jell-O, then Grape Nuts, and then Lucky Strike cigarettes, which I'll get back to later. Abin Costello was sponsored by Camel cigarettes, again I'll get back to that. Nightbee was sponsored by Wheaties. Boston Blackie was sponsored by Nationwide Auto Insurance and CB Beer, both still around. Dick Tracy was sponsored by Quaker. And Suspense also was sponsored by Goodyear. Now, getting back to those cigarette sponsorships, it was a different time when we didn't know about the health risks dealing with smoking cigarettes. So as a result, cigarettes were not only sponsoring these radio shows, but they were also even getting recommendations from doctors about the supposed health benefits. It's crazy to think how people thought back in those days. Something very unique to the Radio Spirits packets is this front cover art by artist Joel Bogart. It's possible that they were just doing this in order to save money. Perhaps it was just cheaper to pay Joel to make these artistic renditions rather than using the original art content due to licensing. But this is all pretty good. I mean, look at this artwork. It's impressive. Unfortunately, I think that the model that they started using for these larger packets was the model that they started going to, because if you look in this catalog, there's no art by Joel listed. It's either promotional cover art that was originally used or their publicity stills. I actually decided to look him up, and he's still around and is still doing art. It's glad to know that what he loves, and these images certainly have a special place in my heart. Now, in terms of movie and TV adaptations, a lot of these got to see them. Suspense was adapted to its own TV show, which actually lasted a lot shorter than the radio show. In fact, the radio show kept going for a lot longer. And one of the episodes, Sorry Wrong Number, was actually adapted into a movie starring Barbara Stanwyck. It's actually been revived in its classic audio form. The Marx Brothers appeared in several movies, though sadly it feels like they're not known to younger audiences. Abin Costello appeared in both TV and movies, most famously in Abin Costello vs. Meets Frankenstein and other horror-related movies. And comedies too. Jack Benny appeared in several movies over the years, almost until the day he died. Mel Blanc, as we all know, went on to star in Looney Tunes, and the Mel Blanc show didn't receive any kind of formal adaptation. Ellery Queen had both movie and TV show adaptations, and is actually referenced in the manga and anime Detective Conan, or Case Closed as it's known stateside. Dick Tracy had both TV shows and movies, and as late as 1990 got another movie adaptation, which actually featured people like Madonna and Robert De Niro. Sherlock Holmes is still getting various adaptations, but most notably with Robert Downey Jr. in the movie Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes Game of Shadows, was a third movie set to come out next year. Philip Marlowe received both TV show and movie adaptations, apparently with Humphrey Bogart. Hopalong Cassidy received both TV show and movie adaptations, again with William Boyd. The Six Shooter was kind of adapted, but it ended up going under a different name without Jimmy Stewart. Sergeant Preston got a TV show, but unfortunately he hasn't gotten the attention that his WXYZ cousins have gotten in recent years. Gunsmoke had a long-standing TV show, which actually ran concurrently with the radio show for a long time. Nightbeat had a TV pilot. It unfortunately wasn't picked up. Boston Blackie had both TV and movie adaptations, but again hasn't gotten a lot of attention in recent years. The Shadow had both TV show and movie adaptations, and as late as 1994 got an adaptation with people like Alec Baldwin, Tim Curry, and Ian McKellen of all people involved. The Green Hornet, as we know, had a TV show with Bruce Lee in the role of Kato, and it had a film in 2011 starring Seth Rogen, which unfortunately flopped. The Lone Ranger also had TV and movie adaptations and got its most recent adaptation in 2013 starring Armie Hammer and Johnny Depp as the Lone Ranger and Tonto respectively. Now, while it seems like the concept of radio drama has been antiquated, there are a few examples of it going on. As I mentioned, suspense was revived, and using it as an outreach tool, Focus on the Family created the Adventures in Odyssey program in 1987, which is still running to this day. Early episodes featured some of the classic stars like Parley Bear, who appeared in The Six Shooter, Gunsmoke, and Tales of the Texas Rangers, was even inducted into the same Audio Hall of Fame as several of these classics. It's all very nostalgic, and it's nice to see that in some way the classic art of radio drama is still living on for the next generation. Of note, this is not a sponsorship in any way. This is just a fan of the radio classics talking about them for someone to enjoy.